Khutulun entered the historical stage in a world where power and survival were measured by strength, courage, and strategic acumen. The Mongol steppes, sprawling and harsh, were unforgiving to the weak, and in such an environment, the rules that governed society were dictated less by law than by ability. From her earliest years, Khutulun would have been acutely aware that her lineage was both a privilege and a responsibility. She was the daughter of Kaidu Khan, a formidable leader whose ambitions and campaigns placed him in direct opposition to the ruling Yuan dynasty, a scion of Genghis Khan's line, a man whose shadow loomed large across Central Asia. But lineage alone was not enough to command respect in a world where might and skill carried as much weight as birthright. Khutulun's story begins with refusal, a refusal to accept the limits society sought to impose on her because of her gender, and a refusal to accept that the natural order demanded she play a passive or ornamental role in her family or her world. Even as a child, Khutulun demonstrated a spirit and energy that could not be constrained by expectation. While her male cousins practiced horsemanship and combat from a young age, she too mastered the saddle, the bow, and the art of wrestling, often outmatching children several years older than her. Her father, recognizing both her potential and the rarity of a child with such courage, allowed her to train alongside the boys, understanding that the skills she honed could one day serve his family's ambitions. In the vast expanses of the steppe, where survival depended on both the individual and the collective strength of one's clan, this training was no mere pastime. It was a preparation for a life in which physical skill and strategic thought would intersect, where victory could mean the difference between dominance and obliteration. The Mongol world of Khutulun's upbringing was complex and often brutal. It was a world that had been shaped by the conquests of her great-grandfather, Genghis Khan, whose armies had swept across Eurasia with unprecedented speed and ferocity. Yet by the time Khutulun was born, the empire had fractured into competing khanates, each vying for power, territory, and legitimacy. Authority was contested constantly, and loyalty was fragile. In such a landscape, the personal qualities of courage, intelligence, and skill were more than admirable. They were essential. Khutulun's emergence into this world was not an accident. The conditions of her birth and upbringing created the circumstances that allowed her to become exceptional, and yet they also imposed a set of challenges that would test every aspect of her being. As she grew, Khutulun's reputation began to precede her. Her feats of strength and skill became well known within her own family and soon beyond. It was said that she could best any challenger in wrestling, a sport that, in Mongol culture, carried significance far beyond physical competition. Wrestling was a demonstration of discipline, courage, and dominance, and Khutulun's victories were a visible proof that she could match, and often surpass, men in arenas where physical prowess defined respect. These early demonstrations of ability were more than youthful games. They were statements. Each match, each conquest, was a declaration that Khutulun would not be constrained by the narrow definitions of femininity prevalent in her society. She was, from the beginning, a figure who refused diminishment, a person whose authority could not be ignored. Her refusal was not simply physical, but political and social. In a culture where women of noble birth were often married off to forge alliances or solidify loyalty, Khutulun's early assertion of autonomy was striking. She would later establish a pattern that would define her life, transforming the expectations placed upon her into opportunities to demonstrate her own values, her own strength, and her own authority. Her defiance was not rebellion for its own sake. It was strategic, rooted in an understanding that power was not given, it was earned, and that the respect of those around her could be secured through deeds, not inheritance alone. In this sense, Khutulun's early life was a series of calculated refusals and affirmations, each contributing to the legend that would eventually define her in historical memory. The Mongol steppes were not merely a backdrop for Khutulun's development. They were a formative environment that demanded resilience. Winters were long, summers could be blistering, and survival required both endurance and adaptability. Khutulun's training in horsemanship and combat was inseparable from this environment, a context in which every skill she mastered had practical application. She learned to read the land, to anticipate danger, and to respond with both decisiveness and agility. These lessons were as critical as any formal instruction in strategy or martial technique, shaping not only her body but her mind. Her early mastery of physical disciplines gave her confidence, but it also provided a framework for understanding authority, leadership, and negotiation. In a world governed by might and maneuver, her early education in both combat and observation prepared her for challenges that would transcend mere physical contests. Khutulun's early victories in wrestling and her growing reputation illustrate the ways in which skill could translate directly into social capital. Each triumph was witnessed, recorded, and recounted, contributing to a perception of invincibility that was both accurate and strategically significant. In the context of Mongol politics, where perception could influence alliances and loyalty, her physical dominance was intertwined with her political presence. This dynamic would become increasingly important as she matured, demonstrating that Khutulun's influence was not merely personal, but systemic. Her ability to command respect, both through physical prowess and through strategic intelligence, positioned her uniquely within a society that prized strength above all else. It is essential to understand that Khutulun's refusal to accept prescribed roles was not a simple defiance of gender norms for dramatic effect. It was a recognition that power in her world was defined by capability, by action, and by reputation. She observed, learned, and then acted in ways that reinforced her authority, ensuring that she would not be marginalized despite the social structures that sought to do exactly that. In doing so, she transformed her exceptional abilities into a statement of inevitability, that her position in history would be earned through merit and action, rather than through birth or marriage alone. From her earliest training to her first public victories, Khutulun's life was a series of demonstrations of this principle, each encounter further solidifying her emerging legend. Even the manner in which she approached contests of strength reflected her understanding of broader consequences. Wrestling matches were not mere entertainment. They were opportunities to assert dominance, to test rivals, and to communicate authority. By choosing to engage in these contests on her terms, Khutulun exercised a form of control that was both visible and symbolic. Each victory served to reinforce a social and political hierarchy in which she was central, challenging traditional assumptions and creating a new paradigm of influence. Her successes did not provoke simple admiration. They demanded recognition, and through them, she carved a space for herself in a world that otherwise would have minimized her presence. By the time she reached adolescence, Khutulun's identity as both warrior and noblewoman was fully established. Her skill, her intelligence, and her strategic awareness combined to create a figure whose authority was undeniable. Observers noted her confidence, her decisiveness, and her refusal to be constrained, qualities that set her apart even within the exceptional company of Mongol nobility. In every encounter, whether in training, on the battlefield, or within the courts of her father's alliances, Khutulun demonstrated a singular combination of physical and mental acuity. This early formation of character and capability would serve as the foundation for her later achievements, ensuring that her story was not merely anecdotal, but deeply intertwined with the social, political, and military currents of her time. Khutulun's early life also illustrates the interplay between personal ability and historical context. Her story was not created in isolation. It emerged from a culture and an environment that valued strength, decisiveness, and visible competence. The steppes demanded resilience, and Mongol politics demanded both loyalty and skill. Khutulun's emergence as a figure of prominence was therefore both a product of her innate qualities and of the circumstances in which she lived. Her legend is compelling because it aligns individual talent with historical necessity, creating a narrative that is at once personal and emblematic of the larger forces at play within the Mongol world. In essence, Khutulun's early life establishes the framework for understanding her later deeds. She is remembered not only for her victories, but for the way she conceptualized power, autonomy, and influence. From her earliest experiences, she demonstrated an acute awareness of the expectations placed upon her and a remarkable ability to navigate and transcend them. Her story begins with refusal, but it is a refusal rooted in strategy, in competence, and in a vision of selfhood that was inseparable from the culture in which she was raised. This combination of innate talent, rigorous training, and environmental shaping laid the groundwork for a life that would challenge assumptions, redefine the possibilities of women in her era, and leave a lasting imprint on historical memory. Khutulun's early years, full of challenge, practice, and public demonstration, were not merely formative. They were the prelude to a legend that would endure across centuries, a story of a princess who refused to be diminished and, in doing so, set herself apart as a figure of extraordinary consequence in the Mongol world. Khutulun's lineage was both a privilege and a crucible, shaping her life in ways that were inseparable from the history of the Mongol world. She was the daughter of Kaidu Khan, himself a grandson of Ogdi, the second son of Genghis Khan, and a man whose ambitions placed him in perpetual conflict with the ruling Yuan dynasty in China. Kaidu was a strategist and warrior of formidable skill, navigating the fractured terrain of Central Asia where loyalty was fluid, alliances were fragile, and every political move carried the weight of life and death. For Khutulun, being born into this environment meant inheriting not only the prestige of her ancestry, but also the constant demands of a world in which power was contested openly and relentlessly. Her father's position required her to understand the stakes of leadership from the earliest age, and it was within this context that her character was forged. From the outset, her childhood was unlike that of most noble women of the time. While many girls of her class were educated primarily in domestic skills, etiquette, and the ceremonial aspects of court life, Khutulun's early experiences were inseparable from the military and political world of her father. She observed strategy being debated, witnessed the formation of alliances, and saw firsthand the way loyalty could shift like the winds across the steppe. These observations were not merely passive. They shaped her understanding of power, governance, and human behavior. She learned to recognize ambition, calculation, and fear in those around her, and to anticipate how these forces might influence the course of events. By the time she could fully participate in training, she possessed an understanding of context and consequence that was rare even among the most accomplished of her male counterparts. Kaidu's household functioned as both a political center and a military hub. Tents and compounds were organized not simply for comfort, but for efficiency and readiness, reflecting a lifestyle in which every member of the family, regardless of age or gender, could be called upon to act. Children were not shielded from the realities of Mongol governance and warfare. Khutulun was exposed early to the preparation and maintenance of armies, the logistics of mounted combat, and the delicate negotiation required to maintain alliances with neighboring clans. Through these experiences, she began to comprehend the intricacies of Mongol politics, the subtle balancing of honor, obligation, and expediency that governed interactions both within her family and with outsiders. Her early education was thus as much about observation and comprehension as it was about skill, and it provided her with a foundation that would later allow her to operate effectively in the male-dominated spheres of command and decision-making. The political world into which Khutulun was born was defined by both continuity and fracture. The Mongol Empire, once unified under Genghis Khan, had expanded across vast swaths of Eurasia, but by her time it had splintered into competing khanates, each led by descendants of Genghis who sought to assert their claim to supremacy. Kaidu himself was embroiled in a protracted struggle against Kublai Khan, whose authority in the eastern reaches of the former empire posed both a threat and an opportunity. These dynamics meant that Khutulun's early life was lived against a backdrop of uncertainty and contestation. Success in such an environment required more than birthright. It demanded skill, intelligence, and a capacity for action that could navigate both battlefield strategy and diplomatic nuance. From her earliest years, she was surrounded by examples of these qualities, witnessing victories celebrated and mistakes punished with equal severity. Within her own family, the presence of multiple male heirs and rivals required a constant awareness of rank, loyalty, and influence. Khutulun's training alongside her brothers and cousins was therefore not only about physical skill, but about positioning herself socially and politically. She learned to assert authority without overstepping bounds, to demonstrate capability in ways that earned respect rather than resentment. In wrestling matches and riding exercises, she honed not just her body, but her understanding of hierarchy, leadership, and the perception of competence. Every victory over a male peer was simultaneously a demonstration of ability and a subtle negotiation of social position, allowing her to navigate a system that had been designed to limit the influence of women. Her father's campaigns and political maneuverings provided both a model and a challenge. Kaidu's life was characterized by careful strategy, calculated risk, and the constant management of alliances. Khutulun absorbed these lessons through observation and participation. When armies marched, she accompanied them, learning the rhythms of movement, supply, and engagement. She witnessed firsthand the importance of morale, of decisive leadership, and of the projection of authority in the field. These experiences reinforced the lessons she had learned in training, translating skill into application. Her understanding of strategy was not abstract. It was grounded in the lived realities of conflict and negotiation, forming a mental architecture that would later allow her to navigate challenges that extended far beyond the wrestling grounds of her youth. At the same time, Khutulun's position within the family exposed her to the limitations imposed by gender. While her physical prowess was remarkable and widely recognized, she still faced expectations that sought to define her role through marriage and alliance rather than independent action. These constraints were subtle and pervasive, shaping the way she presented herself, the choices she made, and the strategies she employed to assert autonomy. Her awareness of these limitations did not diminish her ambition. Rather, it informed her methods. She learned to operate within and around societal expectations, leveraging her skill, reputation, and intelligence to create space for influence and authority that might otherwise have been denied. The Mongol world itself reinforced these dynamics. Strength and capability were respected, but authority was often mediated through male leadership and traditional inheritance. Women could exert influence, particularly within the family or as advisors, but public recognition and formal power were far more constrained. Khutulun's emergence into prominence therefore required both exceptional ability and the strategic navigation of cultural and social norms. Her success was not a product of defiance alone, but of an acute understanding of the system she inhabited, allowing her to exploit opportunities while mitigating risk. Each decision, each demonstration of skill, was both a personal triumph and a calculated assertion of her position within the broader social and political hierarchy. By her adolescence, Khutulun's reputation had already begun to extend beyond her immediate environment. Stories of her victories in wrestling and her skill in combat circulated among neighboring clans and within the networks of Mongol nobility. These accounts were not mere exaggerations. They were factual acknowledgments of her competence, carried by witnesses whose reports could influence alliances and perceptions of power. Her growing fame established her as a figure of authority in her own right, one whose presence and actions could not be ignored. This recognition was both empowering and dangerous, as visibility brought both opportunity and scrutiny, requiring a careful balance between public demonstration and strategic discretion. Within this context, Khutulun's personality and temperament were as critical as her physical abilities. She exhibited a combination of confidence, intelligence, and decisiveness that allowed her to act effectively in situations that might intimidate or overwhelm others. Her decisions were deliberate, informed by both observation and experience, and she displayed a capacity for judgment that extended beyond immediate circumstances. This combination of skill, awareness, and prudence created a presence that was commanding, even in an environment that privileged male authority. Those who encountered her recognized not only her strength, but her understanding of the social and political dynamics at play, establishing a foundation for respect that would endure throughout her life. Khutulun's early life, therefore, was a careful weaving of context, opportunity, and personal ability. She was not merely a gifted athlete or warrior. She was a product of an environment that demanded competence and rewarded initiative, and she possessed the insight to translate her gifts into influence and authority. Her lineage provided the platform, her environment provided the challenges, and her own abilities provided the means to meet them. This convergence of factors laid the groundwork for a figure whose legend would endure because it was rooted not in fantasy or exaggeration, but in historical inevitability. Khutulun's emergence as a force in the Mongol world was as much a reflection of the demands of her time as it was a testament to her exceptional talents, creating a narrative in which skill, circumstance, and character intersected to produce lasting impact. In this way, Khutulun's childhood and early adolescence illustrate the interplay between individual agency and historical context. She was shaped by her family, by the demands of the Mongol steppes, and by the political realities of her father's campaigns, yet she also exercised initiative that defined her trajectory. Her choices, actions, and achievements were inseparable from the environment in which they occurred, creating a story of a young woman whose authority was earned through competence, strategy, and courage. By observing, participating, and asserting herself in a world that constantly tested both her abilities and her social position, Khutulun laid the foundation for a life that would challenge assumptions, inspire contemporaries, and endure in the historical record as a testament to the power of skill aligned with circumstance. Her life as the daughter of Kaidu Khan was therefore defined by this constant balance. The privilege of birth and the demand for ability, the opportunities afforded by lineage, and the constraints imposed by society. From these tensions emerged a figure whose life would be marked by both action and observation, by victories on the field and strategic acumen off it. Khutulun's story in these early years is a portrait of formation, an account of how talent, context, and deliberate effort coalesced to produce a historical figure whose presence was both remarkable and inevitable. Every choice she made, every skill she honed, every observation she recorded became a thread in the tapestry of her emerging legend, setting the stage for a life that would redefine expectations and endure as a symbol of strength, intelligence, and agency in a world that valued both might and calculation. The world that Khutulun inherited was vast, complex, and marked by both opportunity and peril. The Mongol Empire, forged by her great-grandfather Genghis Khan, had grown into a force that spanned continents, from the grasslands of Mongolia to the cities of China and the deserts of Persia. By the time Khutulun was born, however, the empire was no longer a single, unified entity. It had fractured into competing khanates, each led by descendants of Genghis Khan who sought to assert their legitimacy, maintain loyalty among subordinates, and expand influence across vast, often hostile territories. Authority in this landscape was never guaranteed. It had to be earned, reinforced, and defended. For Khutulun, understanding this fractured reality was crucial, for it shaped the conditions under which she would later operate and revealed the stakes of every action, every alliance, and every display of power. The Mongol world of her youth was not static. It was constantly in motion, defined by campaigns, migrations, and shifting loyalties. Trade routes like the Silk Road connected distant cities, bringing goods, ideas, and people into contact, but these routes also carried danger, as rival factions and opportunistic raiders threatened both security and wealth. Knowledge of terrain, timing, and logistics could determine the success of an expedition as surely as the strength of an army. In such a dynamic environment, Khutulun's early exposure to these realities shaped her awareness of strategy, consequence, and adaptation. She learned that power was never absolute, and that even the most capable leaders could falter if they failed to anticipate the subtle interplay of geography, politics, and human behavior. Her father's campaigns against the Yuan dynasty and other rivals offered her a living education in these principles, a curriculum of real-world lessons that textbooks alone could never provide. Within this context, Khutulun's position as Kaidu's daughter was simultaneously advantageous and precarious. Her lineage afforded her access to resources, training, and authority that would be unattainable for most, yet it also placed her under scrutiny and expectation. The Mongol elite valued strength, courage, and strategic insight, but these qualities were evaluated through a lens of male dominance. Women of the nobility could wield influence, particularly within family structures or as advisors, but public recognition of power was rare and often contested. Khutulun's extraordinary abilities, from her mastery of horsemanship to her dominance in wrestling, allowed her to command respect, yet her very visibility also invited challenge and skepticism. To navigate this world required not only physical skill, but also an acute understanding of social and political dynamics, an ability to discern when to assert authority and when to defer, and a capacity to leverage her accomplishments strategically. The Mongol steppe itself played a formative role in shaping her understanding of the world. The land was vast, open, and often harsh, demanding resilience, adaptability, and vigilance from those who traversed it. Horses were essential to mobility, communication, and warfare, and horsemanship was not merely a mark of status, but a necessity for survival. Hunting, herding, and combat training were intertwined with daily life, making the skills Khutulun honed both practical and symbolic. Her ability to ride with agility, shoot accurately, and wrestle with strength allowed her not only to assert personal dominance, but to participate meaningfully in a culture that measured competence through tangible achievement. Mastery of these skills was inseparable from the environment in which they were exercised. Each hill, river, and plain became a classroom, each challenge a lesson in the interplay between ability and circumstance. Kaidu Khan's political ambitions further defined the landscape that Khutulun would come to navigate. He sought to challenge Kublai Khan's dominance, resisting the centralizing authority of the Yuan dynasty while consolidating his own influence across Central Asia. These ambitions created a constant flux of opportunity and danger, requiring Kaidu and his allies to negotiate alliances, respond to betrayals, and project military strength when necessary. For Khutulun, observing her father's leadership provided an intimate education in statecraft, diplomacy, and strategy. She witnessed firsthand the delicate balance required to maintain loyalty among nobles and commanders, the way perception could influence obedience, and how calculated displays of strength could alter the trajectory of conflict. These lessons, internalized through years of observation, complemented the physical training she received and equipped her with the tools to operate effectively within a complex political hierarchy. The Mongol world was also shaped by cultural and social codes that govern behavior, honor, and reputation. Loyalty was paramount, but it was constantly tested by ambition, opportunity, and fear. Honor and reputation were assets, often more valuable than gold or territory, and the respect of peers could influence the outcome of disputes, alliances, and negotiations. In this environment, Khutulun's victories in wrestling, her prowess in combat, and her visible competence were more than personal accomplishments. They were strategic instruments that reinforced her authority, enhanced her family's standing, and subtly shifted perceptions of gender and capability. Each demonstration of skill, carefully observed by family, allies, and rivals alike, became a way of asserting legitimacy, both personally and politically, within a culture that measured worth through tangible achievement. Education and mentorship were critical components of her development. Kaidu and his commanders ensured that Khutulun was not only physically trained but also intellectually engaged. She was exposed to the principles of leadership, negotiation, and tactical decision-making, often witnessing discussions that weighed risk, reward, and consequence in matters of war and governance. She learned to read people, assess intentions, and anticipate reactions, developing a keen sense of judgment that would later inform her actions in both personal and political spheres. This combination of experiential learning and deliberate instruction created a foundation of knowledge and skill that was rare even among the Mongol elite, positioning her for influence that extended beyond the wrestling ring or battlefield. The Mongol world was also one of extremes, where the boundaries between ally and enemy, success and failure, life and death, were fluid. Campaigns could be decisive or disastrous. Alliances could shift overnight, and survival often depended on the ability to anticipate danger and respond with decisiveness. In such a setting, Khutulun's early experiences navigating the steppe, observing campaigns, and participating in training imbued her with resilience, adaptability, and confidence. She learned that power was earned and maintained through action, reputation, and strategic foresight, not merely inherited through bloodline or ceremonial title. Her upbringing instilled a sense of responsibility alongside capability, ensuring that her abilities were always connected to purpose and consequence. In addition, Khutulun witnessed how internal divisions within the Mongol elite could undermine authority. Even within Kaidu's household, rivalries among male relatives and commanders demanded constant attention and strategic navigation. These dynamics reinforced the importance of perception, alliances, and timing. Khutulun learned that skill alone was insufficient. Influence required judgment, discretion, and an understanding of human ambition. Each encounter, each observation of courtly negotiation or military maneuver, became a lesson in leadership, shaping her capacity to act decisively when opportunity arose and to conserve authority when caution was necessary. Her formative years were therefore a careful balance between public demonstration and strategic restraint, physical achievement and intellectual preparation. The exposure to external threats and rival powers further shaped her understanding of consequence. Kaidu's opposition to Kublai Khan meant that the family's fortunes were constantly tied to the outcomes of campaigns, diplomacy, and the shifting allegiances of neighboring khanates. The stakes were not abstract. Failure could result in loss of life, territory, and status. Khutulun's proximity to these high-stakes environments allowed her to internalize the realities of power, the fragility of authority, and the consequences of error. These experiences cultivated both courage and caution, forming a mindset in which strategic calculation and physical capability were inseparable. She learned that leadership demanded resilience, foresight, and the ability to act under pressure, skills that would later define her as a force within the Mongol world. By her late adolescence, Khutulun had developed a reputation that extended well beyond her immediate household. Word of her skill, intelligence, and composure spread among allied and rival clans alike. She became known not only for her victories in physical contests, but also for her insight and judgment in matters of strategy and diplomacy. This growing recognition was both empowering and precarious, as visibility invited challenge, scrutiny, and expectation. Yet Khutulun's early experiences had prepared her to navigate these pressures with poise and authority, allowing her to assert influence while maintaining respect and credibility. She had become a figure whose presence commanded attention and whose actions carried weight, both within her family and across the wider Mongol political landscape. In sum, the Mongol world that Khutulun inherited was a crucible of complexity, opportunity, and risk. It demanded resilience, skill, and strategic acumen from all who sought to survive and thrive within it. Her early exposure to campaigns, political negotiations, social hierarchies, and environmental challenges cultivated a blend of capability and understanding that was rare, even among the elite. Khutulun's mastery of physical disciplines, combined with her awareness of political and social dynamics, created a foundation for authority that was both earned and recognized. Her development was inseparable from the environment in which she lived, and her early life illustrates the interplay between individual talent and historical circumstance, showing how skill, opportunity, and insight converged to produce a figure of remarkable influence and enduring legacy. Through this formative period, Khutulun became attuned to the forces that shaped her world. The ambitions of her father and rivals, the expectations of her culture, the demands of survival on the steppe, and the strategies required to navigate alliances and opposition. These lessons were internalized alongside her physical training, creating a synthesis of action, observation, and judgment that prepared her for a life in which competence, reputation, and decisiveness would define not only her own path, but the perceptions and decisions of those around her. She inherited a world of complexity and challenge, and through observation, participation, and deliberate cultivation of skill, she became equipped to meet it. Her early life in this context establishes the framework for understanding her later prominence, revealing how a combination of circumstance, preparation, and innate talent produced a figure whose presence was historically significant, inevitable, and enduring. Khutulun's training was unlike that of any other girl of her time, and even among her male counterparts, it was exceptional. From the earliest years that she could sit astride a horse, she was encouraged to move with the agility and confidence of a warrior. The steppes were her classroom, the open sky her teacher, and the animals, the terrain, and the weather her constant instructors. She learned to ride before she could walk with surety, to guide a horse across uneven ground, to control its speed and momentum with subtle shifts of weight, and to respond instinctively to the animal's movements. Horsemanship was not an art for display alone, it was a necessity. In a culture where speed and mobility could determine the outcome of a battle, the ability to control a horse was inseparable from survival. Khutulun's early lessons in riding were rigorous and unyielding, demanding endurance, balance, and a precise understanding of movement that would later allow her to maneuver with remarkable skill in both combat and sport. Alongside riding, she mastered the bow, learning not only to shoot accurately while stationary, but also to fire from a galloping horse, a skill that required both precision and courage. Archery on horseback was central to Mongol warfare, a practice honed through centuries of conquest, and Khutulun's ability to match or surpass her male peers in this discipline made her exceptional. Her father recognized that skill alone was insufficient. It had to be complemented by mental discipline, situational awareness, and decisiveness. She learned to aim not only at targets, but at moving adversaries, to calculate trajectory, timing, and wind, and to do so under pressure, sometimes while navigating complex terrain or reacting to sudden obstacles. Her practice sessions were relentless, and through repetition and observation, she developed a capacity for focus and control that became second nature. Each arrow she released, each maneuver she executed, was both a lesson in precision and a testament to her growing competence. Equally demanding was her training in wrestling, a discipline that combined strength, strategy, and endurance. Wrestling was not merely sport in the Mongol context. It was a demonstration of power, skill, and social presence. Through wrestling, Khutulun learned to read an opponent, to anticipate movement, and to exploit both strength and imbalance. Matches were rigorous, physically exhausting, and often psychologically taxing. She was trained to endure pain, fatigue, and the unpredictable nature of human competition. Her victories in these early contests were not anomalies. They were the product of disciplined practice, careful observation, and an acute understanding of cause and effect within physical struggle. Each match reinforced her reputation, not through spectacle alone, but through demonstrated ability, signaling to peers, elders, and observers alike that she was a formidable presence capable of challenging conventions. Her training extended beyond physical skills to encompass elements of strategy and tactical thinking. She was encouraged to observe her father's commanders, to follow maneuvers in mock battles, and to understand how positioning, timing, and coordination could determine outcomes. Even as a child, she was asked to anticipate the moves of others, to plan responses, and to consider the consequences of action and inaction. These lessons in foresight were inseparable from her martial training. She learned that strength without strategy was insufficient, and that the most effective warrior combined agility, power, and judgment. Through such preparation, Khutulun cultivated a mind attuned to opportunity and risk, capable of translating instinct into calculated action. This combination of physical capability and strategic insight set her apart from her contemporaries and laid the groundwork for her later accomplishments. Discipline was central to her regimen. Every day involved repetition, endurance, and incremental improvement. She practiced long hours, often in harsh weather, riding across the steppe in rain, wind, or blistering heat. She wrestled with peers and elders, sometimes facing competitors older and stronger, learning to adapt, compensate, and persevere. Each trial was both a test of skill and a lesson in resilience. Her training instilled a sense of responsibility, an understanding that ability must be earned and maintained. There was no room for complacency. Each day required commitment, focus, and effort. Through this disciplined approach, Khutulun developed not only technical proficiency, but a mental toughness that would become integral to her identity. The public nature of her training further reinforced her development. Competence was not merely personal. It was performative, demonstrating skill and authority to family, peers, and rivals. Wrestling matches, riding contests, and archery trials were observed and remembered, their outcomes shaping reputation and influence. Khutulun learned to project confidence, maintain composure under scrutiny, and convey mastery without arrogance. This ability to navigate perception and reality simultaneously became a defining trait, allowing her to assert presence and authority in contexts where others might have been marginalized. Her physical achievements were inseparable from her social influence, each accomplishment reinforcing her legitimacy and signaling her capabilities to those around her. Her training was also adaptive. As she grew, the demands increased, incorporating more complex scenarios, higher stakes, and varied conditions. She learned to adjust her techniques, refine her judgment, and respond to unexpected challenges. These adaptations were not imposed mechanically, but taught through observation, mentorship, and practice. Kaidu Khan and his commanders encouraged her to understand not only how to act, but why, fostering an analytical approach to skill development. She internalized principles of balance, leverage, and timing, applying them across disciplines, whether in wrestling, archery, or tactical exercises. This holistic approach ensured that her abilities were flexible, context-sensitive, and capable of responding to the unpredictable nature of both sport and warfare. The integration of physical training and cognitive preparation was crucial. Khutulun was encouraged to anticipate, plan, and execute with clarity of purpose. She learned to assess threats, calculate risks, and make rapid decisions under pressure. Each contest, whether against peers or in simulated campaigns, became a laboratory for testing these skills. She developed an intuitive sense of timing, an ability to read the movements and intentions of others, and the confidence to act decisively. Through continuous practice, reflection, and refinement, her capabilities became not only physical, but deeply strategic, aligning skill with intelligence and judgment. Her engagement with mentors and peers also played a formative role. She was challenged by those who sought to test her limits, often facing opponents stronger, older, or more experienced. Each challenge was a lesson in humility, adaptation, and perseverance. Mentorship was not limited to correction or instruction. It included observation, feedback, and opportunities to experiment with strategy and technique. Through this network of guidance and challenge, Khutulun learned the value of collaboration, analysis, and resilience. She internalized the principle that growth required both success and failure, and that mastery was a continuous process rather than a static achievement. The cultural significance of her training cannot be overstated. In Mongol society, martial skill was intimately connected to honor, social status, and political influence. Proficiency in horseback riding, archery, and wrestling was recognized and respected, particularly among the elite. By excelling in these disciplines, Khutulun demonstrated that she could operate within and even excel in the most demanding spheres of Mongol life. Her accomplishments challenged prevailing assumptions about gender and capability, illustrating that authority and skill were determined by competence rather than convention. She was building not just personal mastery, but a foundation for social and political influence that would allow her to navigate the complex hierarchies of her world. Equally important was the psychological aspect of her training. She developed patience, focus, and endurance, learning to remain calm under pressure and to approach challenges with clarity of mind. Each trial reinforced confidence in her abilities, while simultaneously teaching respect for the skills and experience of others. She internalized the understanding that dominance was not achieved through brute force alone, but through strategy, precision, and composure. Her victories were meaningful because they were deliberate, the product of preparation, insight, and disciplined execution. By the time Khutulun reached the peak of her adolescent training, she had transformed into a figure whose competence was undeniable. Her mastery of physical disciplines was matched by her understanding of strategy, her composure under observation, and her awareness of social dynamics. She had cultivated a presence that commanded respect, a skill set that transcended gender expectations, and an understanding of power that extended beyond the individual to encompass alliances, perception, and influence. The rigorous combination of training, observation, and mentorship had prepared her to operate effectively in the wider Mongol world, equipping her with tools that would be critical in asserting authority, navigating political complexities, and establishing her enduring reputation. In essence, Khutulun's training was a convergence of physical rigor, strategic thinking, and psychological fortitude. It was not designed merely to cultivate strength or skill, but to create a holistic capacity for action, judgment, and influence. She learned to anticipate, adapt, and execute with precision, to read both terrain and opponent, and to assert authority through competence. Every hour on horseback, every match in wrestling, every arrow loosed in practice contributed to the development of a figure who would later dominate not only the athletic arenas of her culture, but the political and military spheres that defined her world. Through disciplined effort, observation, and deliberate cultivation of talent, Khutulun became more than a warrior. She became a symbol of capability and a model of how preparation, intellect, and skill could converge to produce authority and enduring influence. Khutulun's decision to assert her authority through wrestling was a statement that resonated far beyond the physical contest itself. In Mongol society, wrestling was more than sport. It was a public demonstration of strength, skill, and a social standing. Competence in this arena was visible to all, and victories were remembered and recounted, often carrying implications for prestige, influence, and reputation. Khutulun's choice to engage male challengers in wrestling was therefore not an act of mere bravado, but a calculated assertion of autonomy and capability. By doing so, she redefined the expectations of her gender and transformed personal competition into a form of political and social influence, demonstrating that skill and strength could confer authority in a society that valued both above all else. Her approach to wrestling was methodical and disciplined. She trained relentlessly, honing not only her physical strength, but also her technique, balance, and strategy. Wrestling, unlike other sports, required a combination of agility, endurance, and tactical thinking. It demanded the ability to anticipate an opponent's movements, to exploit moments of imbalance, and to maintain composure under pressure. Khutulun excelled in these areas, applying lessons from her broader martial training to each encounter. She observed her opponents carefully, learned from their patterns, and adapted her techniques to exploit weaknesses. Each match became an opportunity not just to win, but to refine her skill, to assert dominance, and to send a clear message about her capability and authority. The social and cultural impact of her victories was significant. In a society where women were rarely recognized for physical prowess, Khutulun's successes disrupted conventional hierarchies. Her victories over male challengers were not anomalies to be dismissed. They were observable, undeniable demonstrations of ability. Each triumph reinforced her reputation, attracting attention from allies, rivals, and chroniclers alike. Her skill became a form of social currency, granting her influence that extended beyond the wrestling ground. It was a subtle but profound shift in perception, showing that respect and authority could be earned through action rather than conferred by gender or birth alone. Khutulun's wrestling contests were also deeply symbolic, especially in the context of marriage and courtship. She imposed a unique condition upon her suitors. Any man who wished to marry her had first to defeat her in wrestling. This condition was not an expression of caprice, but a deliberate assertion of control over her own destiny. By establishing this rule, she transformed a traditional social expectation into a venue for demonstrating autonomy. She ensured that her suitors understood not only her strength, but her insistence on equality and agency. This approach was revolutionary within her cultural context, turning what might have been a personal or private decision into a public affirmation of competence and authority. The challenge extended beyond physical confrontation to encompass psychological resilience. Wrestling against multiple challengers, often older, stronger, or more experienced, required more than brute strength. Khutulun had to maintain focus, manage fatigue, and anticipate strategies, all while remaining composed in the eyes of spectators. Her victories were therefore a testament not merely to physical skill, but to mental discipline and fortitude. She demonstrated the ability to integrate preparation, observation, and execution, translating rigorous training into tangible results that resonated socially and politically. Each match became a microcosm of the broader demands of leadership and strategy, blending physical prowess with cognitive skill and social awareness. The cumulative effect of her victories transformed her public image. Tales of her success spread across the steppes, reaching neighboring clans and distant courts. She became known not merely as the daughter of Kaidu Khan, but as an individual whose ability and authority were independently recognized. This growing reputation attracted both admiration and challenge. Competitors were motivated by ambition, pride, and curiosity, eager to test themselves against her and to claim the prestige of victory. Rather than diminishing her standing, these challenges reinforced it, providing further opportunities to demonstrate skill, composure, and dominance. Each match became part of a larger narrative, establishing her as a figure whose presence commanded attention and respect, and whose influence extended into social and political spheres. Her victories also had practical implications for her father's campaigns and the standing of her household. In a culture where martial ability was intimately tied to authority, Khutulun's skill served as a tangible reinforcement of the family's strength. Allies and rivals alike recognized that the household produced not only capable men, but also an extraordinary woman capable of excelling in arenas traditionally dominated by men. This perception enhanced the prestige of Kaidu's court, subtly influencing negotiations, alliances, and the willingness of others to engage with the family on terms that respected their competence and authority. Khutulun's personal achievements thus carried broader strategic weight, intertwining individual skill with political consequence. The symbolic resonance of her wrestling extended to questions of gender, power, and societal expectation. By consistently defeating male challengers, Khutulun challenged assumptions about the limitations of women's capabilities. She demonstrated that authority, respect, and influence were earned through competence, not dictated by convention. In doing so, she reshaped perceptions of what was possible for women in her society, creating a precedent that would echo across her family, her community, and the accounts of later chroniclers. Her actions were deliberate, combining skill with strategic awareness, and they reflected a nuanced understanding of the interplay between social norms, perception, and authority. Her approach was also characterized by humility and respect for opponents. While her victories were numerous and decisive, she did not cultivate arrogance or contempt. Instead, she treated each match as an opportunity to demonstrate excellence, refine her abilities, and uphold the integrity of competition. This approach enhanced the legitimacy of her reputation, showing that her dominance was the product of skill and preparation rather than brute force or intimidation. Her composure and sportsmanship further reinforced her authority, establishing her as a figure whose influence derived from competence, judgment, and the consistent demonstration of excellence. In addition, Khutulun's wrestling served as a platform for mentoring and influencing others. Her matches inspired younger members of her family and peers to pursue rigorous training and to develop their own abilities. She demonstrated that achievement was possible through dedication, strategy, and perseverance, creating a model for excellence that extended beyond her immediate accomplishments. Her presence in the wrestling arena became both an educational and symbolic force, shaping expectations, behaviors, and aspirations within her social and familial network. Through her example, she cultivated not only personal reputation, but a broader cultural understanding of what women could achieve when opportunity and ability were aligned. The integration of wrestling into her broader life strategy reflected a profound understanding of causality and consequence. Each match was a deliberate choice, reinforcing her autonomy, enhancing her reputation, and solidifying her influence. Khutulun's victories were never isolated events. They were part of a continuous trajectory that intertwined personal skill with political and social awareness. She recognized that authority was not merely granted but demonstrated, and that each public performance had implications that extended far beyond the immediate contest. Through this lens, her wrestling becomes a case study in the strategic exercise of competence, blending physical mastery with social intelligence, foresight, and psychological resilience. Her dominance in wrestling also intersected with diplomacy and negotiation. Visitors, allies, and potential adversaries observe her skill and presence, understanding that she was a person of capability and influence. The respect she commanded extended into conversations, alliances, and even rivalries, influencing interactions in ways that might not have been possible without the public validation of her abilities. Wrestling, in this sense, was both performance and proof, creating an indisputable metric of authority that could not be ignored in either familial or political contexts. Khutulun's victories thus became a form of soft power, reinforcing her status while subtly shaping the perceptions and behaviors of those around her. Finally, the cumulative effect of her early wrestling victories established a foundation for enduring influence. Each contest contributed to a growing legend, demonstrating the alignment of skill, preparation, and strategic awareness. Her ability to navigate expectation, assert autonomy, and command respect created a model of authority that extended across social, political, and martial domains. Khutulun's wrestling was not mere sport. It was an instrument of self-definition, a demonstration of competence, and a form of leadership. Through relentless training, disciplined execution, and deliberate engagement, she transformed the wrestling arena into a platform for asserting identity, shaping reputation, and consolidating influence. The narrative of her victories became inseparable from her broader life trajectory, illustrating how ability, strategy, and public demonstration could converge to produce authority, respect, and lasting legacy. As Khutulun's reputation grew, the stories of her victories traveled far beyond the borders of her father's domain, reaching distant camps, marketplaces, and courts across the Mongol steppe. In a world where news moved at the pace of riders and caravans, the tale of a young woman who consistently bested male challengers was extraordinary. Yet it was not merely the fact of her victories that captivated attention. It was the deliberate manner in which she asserted authority, the precision of her skill, and the discipline with which she maintained her dominance. The accumulation of these traits created a figure who became impossible to ignore, a presence whose competence demanded recognition and whose reputation extended influence without the need for formal decree or inherited authority. By the time she entered adolescence, Khutulun was not simply a member of a prominent family. She was a symbol of capability and power, acknowledged and respected across the steppes. Her growing fame carried with it both admiration and scrutiny. Allies spoke of her skill with respect, noting her ability to best men in physical contests and her composure in high-stakes situations. Rivals, driven by ambition or pride, were drawn to challenge her, seeking not only the personal prestige of victory, but also the opportunity to test their mettle against someone of undeniable competence. These challenges were never taken lightly. Each match was an event of consequence, observed by witnesses whose perception could influence social standing and political relationships. In this sense, Khutulun's presence in the public sphere was inseparable from the broader dynamics of Mongol society, where reputation, skill, and perception carried tangible weight in matters of influence and authority. Traveling across the steppe, news of her victories inspired both awe and curiosity. Stories were recounted in nomadic camps, in the courts of allied khans, and among merchant caravans traversing long trade routes. Her exploits became a point of reference, an example of the heights a skilled individual could reach through discipline and determination. These narratives were reinforced by eyewitness accounts and by the structured competitions she engaged in, ensuring that her reputation rested on verifiable competence rather than exaggeration. The widespread recognition she achieved illustrates how skill and accomplishment could intersect with social networks to produce influence, creating a feedback loop in which success invited attention, attention invited challenges, and challenges offered further opportunities to demonstrate superiority. The challenges she faced were not trivial. Many of her opponents were experienced warriors, trained from youth in the arts of horsemanship, archery, and combat. Each confrontation tested her physical strength, agility, and tactical awareness. More subtly, these encounters tested her mental resilience, her ability to remain composed under pressure, and her capacity to anticipate and adapt to unforeseen circumstances. Victory required not only physical capability but strategic intelligence, allowing her to assess opponents, exploit their weaknesses, and execute maneuvers with precision. These repeated contests reinforced her mastery while simultaneously shaping her reputation, demonstrating that her dominance was earned rather than assumed. The significance of her growing fame extended beyond the sphere of athletic competition. Khutulun's accomplishments had social and political ramifications. In a society where respect and influence were often negotiated through displays of competence, her victories became a form of currency. They conferred authority, shaped perceptions, and subtly influenced the behavior of those around her. Allies and observers recognized that she was a figure whose judgment, skill, and composure demanded consideration. Rivals approached her with caution, understanding that public defeat could carry consequences for personal prestige and social standing. In this sense, her physical achievements were inseparable from broader structures of power and influence, reinforcing her role as a figure of consequence in the Mongol world. Her fame also served as a source of inspiration within her own family and broader social network. Younger relatives and peers observed her victories and the respect they commanded, learning lessons in discipline, perseverance, and the strategic exercise of skill. Khutulun's presence became both educational and symbolic, illustrating how competence could intersect with opportunity to produce authority. She demonstrated that mastery was not solely the product of natural talent, but of sustained effort, deliberate practice, and thoughtful engagement with both allies and competitors. Through this example, she cultivated a culture of excellence and ambition, shaping expectations and behaviors in ways that extended beyond her immediate accomplishments. The challenges she faced as her reputation spread were not only physical, but also social. Men who confronted her were motivated not only by the prospect of victory, but by the desire to contest her authority and assert traditional hierarchies. Each match, therefore, carried layers of significance, testing not only skill but social perception, psychological resilience, and strategic calculation. Khutulun navigated these challenges with a combination of preparation, awareness, and composure, demonstrating that authority was reinforced through consistent demonstration rather than assumed by birthright. Her ability to maintain dominance under scrutiny reinforced the legitimacy of her influence, creating a model of power based on capability, strategy, and reputation. The Mongol steppe, vast and interconnected, amplified the impact of her growing fame. News traveled along trade routes, through nomadic networks, and via diplomatic exchanges, ensuring that her reputation extended beyond immediate localities. The steppe itself, with its openness and mobility, allowed accomplishments to be observed, recounted, and verified across great distances. Khutulun's presence became a point of reference for skill and authority, a symbol that resonated with those who valued competence and respected achievement. This visibility reinforced her ability to influence social and political networks, demonstrating how individual accomplishment could intersect with environmental and cultural conditions to produce enduring recognition. Her reputation also altered the dynamics of competition. Those who sought to challenge her had to consider not only the immediate contest, but the broader consequences of victory or defeat. Public perception was inseparable from private skill, and each match carried implications for social standing, alliances, and the negotiation of respect. Khutulun's ability to consistently assert dominance shaped the behavior of those around her, creating a social environment in which her authority was recognized and, in many cases, deferred to. Her victories were cumulative, building not only personal accomplishment but structural influence, reinforcing her position within both familial and broader political hierarchies. At the same time, Khutulun's growing fame necessitated continuous vigilance and refinement. Success brought increased scrutiny, challenges, and expectations. She had to maintain peak physical condition, sharpen her strategic awareness, and adapt her techniques to counter increasingly sophisticated opponents. Her training evolved in response to these demands, incorporating lessons learned from previous contests and integrating new strategies and insights. This iterative process ensured that her skill remained relevant, her dominance secure, and her reputation sustained. The growth of her fame was therefore not accidental. It was the product of sustained effort, deliberate strategy, and continuous refinement of both skill and understanding. The psychological dimension of her fame was equally significant. Recognition and visibility carried both opportunity and pressure. Khutulun had to navigate expectations, maintain composure under observation, and manage the social and political implications of her victories. Each match required not only execution but perception management, ensuring that her authority was conveyed through confidence, discipline, and strategic awareness. Her ability to combine competence with social intelligence allowed her to navigate complex interactions, maintain respect, and consolidate influence across multiple domains. Fame, in her case, was inseparable from responsibility, requiring a continuous alignment of skill, judgment, and perception. Her expanding influence also intersected with diplomacy and alliance building. Observers, allies, and potential rivals recognized her competence, adjusting their strategies and interactions accordingly. Khutulun's reputation became a factor in negotiation, alliance, and social engagement, illustrating how individual accomplishment could shape broader social dynamics. Her victories were both personal achievements and instruments of influence, reinforcing the authority of her household, shaping perceptions among peers, and contributing to the strategic positioning of her father's domain. In this way, her fame had both symbolic and practical significance, influencing behavior, shaping expectations, and reinforcing power structures. By her late adolescence, Khutulun had established herself as a figure whose reputation extended across the Mongol steppe, recognized for skill, discipline, and composure. She had transformed physical contests into instruments of influence, combining competence with strategy to assert autonomy and command respect. Her fame was cumulative, reinforced by repeated demonstrations of ability, strategic awareness, and social intelligence. It was not mere legend, but a reflection of consistent, verifiable achievement, grounded in rigorous preparation, deliberate execution, and insightful observation. Through this combination of skill, visibility, and strategic engagement, Khutulun became a figure whose presence shaped perceptions, influenced behavior, and extended the authority of her household across a complex and competitive landscape. In essence, the spread of her fame illustrates the interplay between personal skill and social influence in the Mongol world. Competence created recognition, Recognition invited challenge. Challenge provided opportunities for further demonstration. Khutulun navigated this cycle with a combination of physical mastery, strategic intelligence, and composure, consolidating influence and shaping perceptions in ways that extended beyond individual contests. Her growing reputation was not only a testament to her skill, but a reflection of her capacity to translate personal achievement into social and political authority, creating a foundation for the enduring legacy that would define her life and her story. Khutulun's reputation as a formidable warrior and strategist did more than captivate the imagination of her contemporaries. It positioned her within the broader currents of political and military power that defined her father's reign. Kaidu Khan, her father, was not merely a regional ruler, but a man engaged in sustained opposition against Kublai Khan and the Yuan dynasty. His campaigns were calculated, relentless, and essential to maintaining both his own authority and the cohesion of his domain. For Khutulun, being the daughter of a figure engaged in constant political struggle meant that her life was inseparable from the complexities of leadership, conflict, and diplomacy. Her early experiences were shaped not only by physical training, but by the observation of political strategy in action, providing her with lessons that would inform her approach to influence and authority in later years. From an early age, she accompanied her father's forces during campaigns, moving across the steppes alongside cavalry units and witnessing the realities of military engagement firsthand. The Mongol armies were highly mobile, disciplined, and strategically sophisticated, relying on coordinated maneuvers, speed, and adaptability to achieve their objectives. Khutulun's exposure to these operations allowed her to understand the intricacies of planning, timing, and execution in a military context. She observed how her father anticipated enemy movements, managed supply lines, and leveraged both terrain and troop mobility to gain advantage. These lessons were internalized through repeated observation and participation, providing her with a practical education in strategy and leadership that was rare for someone of her age and almost unheard of for a woman in her society. Her presence in military campaigns was not passive. Though she did not lead armies in her early years, she participated in exercises, practiced mounted archery, and engaged in simulated combat scenarios alongside male warriors. These activities were rigorous, often exposing her to physical and psychological challenges that required endurance, composure, and judgment. She was expected to perform at a level commensurate with her male counterparts, reinforcing her reputation as a warrior whose skill and intelligence could not be questioned. The integration of her training with real-world observation created a synthesis of action and analysis, allowing her to understand not only how to act effectively in battle, but also how to anticipate and influence the outcomes of complex situations. Within Kaidu's court, the dynamics of power and loyalty were constantly negotiated. Advisors, commanders, and nobles all operated with competing ambitions and interests, and alliances were fluid. Khutulun learned to navigate these dynamics with acumen, observing who wielded influence, how decisions were made, and how trust and reputation were maintained or eroded. She understood that authority was not simply inherited. It was demonstrated through competence, foresight, and the ability to command respect. These lessons were reinforced through her own achievements in wrestling, archery, and horsemanship, which served as tangible evidence of her ability and reliability. By connecting physical competence with social and political understanding, she cultivated a presence that could influence outcomes both on and off the battlefield. Her early involvement in political and military affairs also exposed her to the consequences of failure. Campaigns were high-stakes endeavors in which miscalculation could lead to loss of territory, diminished influence, or death. Khutulun observed the repercussions when strategies faltered, when alliances shifted unexpectedly, or when rivals exploited weakness. These experiences taught her the importance of preparation, adaptability, and the management of risk. She internalized the principle that effective leadership required not only skill but prudence, foresight, and the ability to respond decisively under pressure. In this sense, her early exposure to military operations was as much a lesson in judgment as in combat, shaping her capacity to navigate complex and high-stakes environments with clarity and authority. The broader political landscape of Central Asia during her youth was equally formative. The fragmented nature of the Mongol successor states meant that loyalty was fluid and authority constantly contested. Kaidu's opposition to the Yuan dynasty required careful negotiation with neighboring clans, the management of internal factions, and the projection of power to maintain dominance. Khutulun witnessed the delicate balance between diplomacy and force, the way alliances could be both advantageous and precarious, and the subtle negotiation required to maintain cohesion among diverse groups. These observations informed her understanding of power as a multidimensional phenomenon, where strength alone was insufficient and where influence depended on reputation, credibility, and strategic communication. Her growing fame as a wrestler and warrior augmented her capacity to participate meaningfully in these political contexts. Allies and observers recognized her competence, understanding that she could act decisively, model discipline, and command respect. Her achievements became a form of social proof, reinforcing her father's authority and signaling to rivals that his household possessed remarkable capability. In this way, Khutulun's personal accomplishments had ramifications beyond individual reputation. They influenced the strategic calculations of others, subtly shaping behavior and decision-making in ways that reinforced her family's position and security. Her presence became both a stabilizing and assertive force within her father's domain, demonstrating how personal skill could translate into broader influence. Khutulun also began to exercise judgment and initiative in matters that intersected with military and political strategy. While she did not command armies as a teenager, she offered insights, observations, and recommendations during deliberations, often demonstrating a nuanced understanding of both human behavior and tactical possibilities. Her contributions were recognized by her father and his commanders, further reinforcing the perception of her competence and establishing her as a figure whose counsel could be valued alongside traditional sources of authority. This integration of insight, skill, and reputation illustrates the emergence of leadership, not through formal title alone, but through demonstrated capability and strategic engagement. Her role as a participant in political and military life was further amplified by her growing autonomy and assertiveness. She increasingly navigated her interactions with peers, rivals, and allies with deliberate intention, leveraging her reputation and skill to shape outcomes. She understood the symbolic and practical power of her presence, and she employed it with precision, asserting authority where necessary and deferring strategically when expedient. This capacity for self-directed action within complex social and political structures was rare and remarkable, illustrating the convergence of talent, observation, and judgment that characterized her development. At the same time, Khutulun's engagement in political and military spheres was inseparable from the cultural and social expectations of her environment. Mongol society valued strength, discipline, and strategic competence, yet formal recognition of female authority was limited. She navigated this tension by grounding her influence in observable skill and consistent demonstration, ensuring that her reputation could not be dismissed. By aligning her personal capabilities with the values and expectations of her culture, she created a form of authority that was both legitimate and resilient, transcending conventional limitations imposed by gender while remaining compatible with the social norms of her world. Her early experiences in these contexts also shaped her understanding of legacy and historical memory. Khutulun observed how deeds, victories, and decisions were remembered, recounted, and used to reinforce authority across generations. She internalized the principle that enduring influence required not only immediate competence, but a sustained pattern of achievement and demonstration. Each match, each observation, each contribution to her father's campaigns became part of a cumulative record, establishing her credibility and reinforcing her emerging legend. This awareness of historical consequence informed her choices, reinforcing the integration of skill, strategy, and public presence as foundational elements of influence. By the end of her adolescence, Khutulun had evolved into a figure whose authority and presence were recognized both within her family and across the wider Mongol steppe. Her mastery of physical disciplines, combined with her strategic awareness, composure, and insight, positioned her as a participant in political and military life whose competence could not be ignored. She had cultivated a presence that intertwined skill, observation, and judgment, demonstrating that influence could be exercised through performance, reputation, and consistent demonstration of capability. Her life illustrates the interplay between inherited status, personal achievement, and strategic acumen, showing how talent, opportunity, and deliberate cultivation of skill converge to produce enduring authority.